The history of missile defense is the history of a single problem stated in different ways across different decades. The problem is not speed. Speed is manageable once you accept its terms. The problem is deception, the specific, engineered deception of a weapon that is designed to look like it is going somewhere and then go somewhere else. In the last seconds of its flight, when the intercept solution has been committed and the defending system has no time left to revise. At 3:17 a.m., the problem arrived in a form that the Patriot battery commander had studied in every pre-deployment intelligence briefing for 14 months and had not yet encountered in operational employment. The Defense Support Program satellite constellation registered the first launch from a site 70 kilometers southwest of Dezful at 3:17 a.m. and 9 seconds. A thermal bloom of 24-second duration, consistent with the first-stage motor of a medium-range ballistic missile in the PAC-3 class, a solid-fuel weapon that Iran had been developing and testing for years and whose latest variant had been the subject of a specific intelligence advisory issued to theater missile defense units 48 hours before this specific morning. The advisory had characterized the PAC-3's latest variant as equipped with a terminal phase maneuvering reentry vehicle, a warhead capable of executing a lateral course correction in the final 20 to 30 seconds of its descent, producing an impact point displacement of several hundred meters from the trajectory that the defending system's fire control radar had been tracking throughout the flight. The advisory had been read. The battery had rehearsed its response protocol for maneuvering re-entry vehicles 23 times in the training cycle preceding the deployment. 23 rehearsals against a simulated target. At 3:17 a.m., the 24th repetition was the operational event. The second launch registered at 3:17 a.m. and 41 seconds, same site, 32 seconds after the first. 2 missiles. The trajectory computations from both launches were being processed simultaneously at the Al Udeid Combined Air Operations Center and at the 2 forward-deployed Patriot batteries and the single THAAD battery that formed the layered theater missile defense network protecting the American and coalition installations in the western Iraq-eastern Syria corridor. The first missile's trajectory was refining toward a projected impact point consistent with Al-Assad Air Base. The second missile's trajectory was computing toward a projected impact point consistent with the logistics support facility at Al-Tanf. 2 separate targets. 2 separate launch windows separated by 32 seconds. A timing architecture that forced both engaged batteries to initiate their intercept sequences against separate threats simultaneously rather than sequentially, dividing their fire control radar attention and their engagement management resources at the moment when both were most needed. The THAAD battery, positioned at the geometric center of the defended area, its XBR radar providing the highest resolution track data in the network, was the primary engagement asset for the first missile, whose high apogee and steep terminal approach were within THAAD's designed engagement envelope. The Patriot battery at Al-Assad was the primary engagement asset for both missiles in the lower altitude terminal phase, with the second Patriot battery at Erbil designated as backup for the second missile's engagement. The THAAD fire control officer had both missile tracks on his display at 3:17 a.m. and 52 seconds. The trajectory solutions were preliminary but refining rapidly with each XBR radar sweep. The first missile's apogee was projecting at approximately 1,100 kilometers, a lofted profile consistent with a test trajectory, but also with a precision strike profile that maximized the terminal approach angle for a maneuvering re-entry vehicle. Since steeper descent angles reduced the lateral distance the defending system's intercept solution needed to project and therefore reduced the margin within which a maneuver could displace the warhead relative to the predicted impact point. The adversary had chosen a trajectory that optimized the maneuver's effectiveness. The THAAD interceptor released at 3:19 a.m. and 4 seconds, 1 minute and 55 seconds after the first launch detection, the kinetic intercept vehicle climbing toward the engagement geometry that the XBR was continuously refining. The second missile was still in its boost and mid-course phases. the Patriot at Al-Assad tracking its lower trajectory with the PAC-3 missile segment enhancement interceptors that were specifically designed for the shorter engagement timelines of the Patriot system's operating altitude band. At 3:20 a.m. and 11 seconds, the first missile's reentry vehicle separated from its bus stage. Reentry vehicle separation was expected. It was the bus-to-warhead transition that every ballistic missile made in its terminal phase. What was not expected, not excluded from the intelligence advisory, but not confirmed as demonstrated rather than assessed, was the reentry vehicle's behavior in the 37 seconds between its separation and the moment the THAAD intercept vehicle reached its computed intercept point. The XBR's track on the reentry vehicle showed a clean, standard ballistic descent for the first 19 seconds after separation. The trajectory was exactly what the intercept solution had been computed against. The kinetic intercept vehicle was navigating toward a point in space that the XBR's track was confirming, sweep after sweep, as the reentry vehicle's predicted position at intercept time. At 3:20 a.m. and 27 seconds, 18 seconds after separation, 14 seconds before the computed intercept, the reentry vehicle maneuvered. The maneuver was lateral, a course displacement executed by the reentry vehicle's own aerodynamic control surfaces, generating a trajectory change of approximately 6 degrees from its previous descent bearing. 6 degrees at the terminal velocity and altitude of a reentry vehicle in its final descent phase translated, over 14 seconds of remaining flight time, to a projected impact point displacement of approximately 340 meters from the original predicted position. 340 meters. The THAAD kinetic intercept vehicle was navigating to the original predicted position. The reentry vehicle was no longer going to that position. The XBR updated its track picture at 3:20 a.m. and 27 seconds, the radar's high-resolution tracking capability detecting the maneuver within a single sweep interval and computing the reentry vehicle's new trajectory parameters. The updated trajectory propagated immediately to the THAAD fire control system's engagement solution, which computed the displacement between the kinetic intercept vehicle's current navigation target and the re-entry vehicle's updated projected position. The displacement was 180 meters at the current range, growing at the differential closure rates of the two objects, the kinetic intercept vehicle's terminal seeker head, an imaging infrared sensor that acquired the re-entry vehicle's thermal signature in the final seconds of intercept, had the re-entry vehicle on its display. The seeker was generating steering commands to the intercept vehicle's control surfaces, attempting to correct the guidance trajectory onto the maneuvered re-entry vehicle's updated position. The correction commands were within the intercept vehicle's maneuvering envelope. It could execute the correction. The question was whether the correction would close the 180-meter and growing displacement before the intercept vehicle's fuel state reached the point where further maneuvering was no longer achievable. The THAAD fire control officer could not alter the intercept in its terminal phase. The kinetic intercept vehicle's terminal guidance was self-executing. He watched the XBR picture and the telemetry readout with the specific quality of attention that produces no actionable output and cannot be replaced by anything else in the available time. At 3:20 a.m. and 41 seconds, the kinetic intercept vehicle's seeker completed its terminal guidance correction. The intercept occurred at 3:20 a.m. and 42 seconds. 1 second after the correction completed, 16 seconds after the re-entry vehicle's maneuver. The kinetic intercept vehicle reached the re-entry vehicle's corrected position at a relative velocity that the XBR's post-intercept track picture would characterize as a direct hit rather than a proximity engagement. The re-entry vehicle ceased to exist as a functional weapon at 3:20 a.m. and 42 seconds. Its structural integrity destroyed by the collision energy at closing speeds measured in kilometers per second. The first missile's maneuvering re-entry vehicle had been intercepted. The THAAD seeker's correction had closed the 180-meter displacement gap in 16 seconds. The margin was narrow. The fire control officer noted it with the specific professional composure that narrow margins require in the seconds after they resolve correctly. A composure that does not celebrate the outcome before the second engagement is complete. The second missile's re-entry vehicle separated at 3:20 a.m. and 33 seconds, 9 seconds before the first intercept, the two engagement timelines running in parallel across the network's fire control picture. The Patriot battery at Al-Asad had been tracking the second missile's trajectory with its own fire control radar since 3:18 a.m., its PAC-3 MSE interceptors in launch-ready status with an engagement solution that had been refining for 2 minutes and 15 seconds when the second missile's re-entry vehicle came into the Patriot's engagement altitude band. The PAC-3 MSE's engagement geometry was different from the THAAD's. The Patriot operated at lower altitude against shorter-range threat parameters with an intercept window that was measured in seconds rather than the minutes that THAAD worked with. The PAC-3 was a smaller, faster interceptor, a direct-hit seeker system like the THAAD, but operating in a denser atmosphere at lower altitude where aerodynamic forces on both the interceptor and the re-entry vehicle were larger, and the re-entry vehicle's control surfaces were generating more maneuver authority from the denser air. More maneuver authority meant a larger potential displacement from a terminal course correction. The second missile's re-entry vehicle maneuvered at 3:20 a.m. and 48 seconds, 15 seconds after the Patriot's first PAC-3 MSE had launched at 3:20 a.m. and 19 seconds. The maneuver was 11 degrees of lateral displacement, larger than the first missile's 6-degree correction. At the lower altitude and shorter remaining flight time of the Patriot engagement band, 11 degrees produced a projected impact point displacement of approximately 290 meters from the PAC-3 MSE's navigation target. The PAC-3 MSE's seeker acquired the maneuvered re-entry vehicle and began generating correction steering commands at 3:20 a.m. and 51 seconds. The correction requirement was larger than the first intercepts had been, and the engagement geometry was tighter. Less altitude, less time. Denser atmosphere increasing the aerodynamic loads on both the interceptor's control surfaces and the seeker's tracking stability. The first PAC-3 MSE missed. Its seeker corrected, but the displacement was not fully closed by the time the intercept vehicle's kinetic energy budget for maneuvering was exhausted. The intercept vehicle passed within 73 meters of the re-entry vehicle's corrected position, inside the proximity fuse's detonation threshold for some fusing configurations, outside it for others. This fusing configuration required a closer approach. The fire control system had launched a second PAC-3 MSE at 3:20 a.m. and 27 seconds, 8 seconds after the first, the standard salvo protocol for a theater missile defense engagement where the threat's maneuvering capability had been assessed as potentially exceeding single-shot intercept probability. The second PAC-3 MSE was trailing the first by 8 seconds of flight time, its own seeker tracking the re-entry vehicle's continuously updating position on the fire control radar feed. The second PAC-3 MSE had the re-entry vehicle's post-maneuver position on its seeker from the moment of acquisition. Not the original trajectory the first interceptor had been correcting toward, but the maneuvered position that the first interceptor had partially but not fully closed. The second interceptor's geometry, combined with the re-entry vehicle's position now established on the post-maneuver trajectory, produced a cleaner intercept solution with less required correction. The second PAC-3 MSE intercepted the re-entry vehicle at 3:20 a.m. and 58 seconds, 10 seconds after the first intercept's near miss, 22 kilometers above the Iraqi desert south of Al-Asad Air Base. The re-entry vehicle's structural integrity was destroyed by the direct hit collision energy. The second maneuvering re-entry vehicle had been intercepted. 2 missiles. 2 maneuvering warheads. Both intercepted. Total time from first launch detection to second intercept. 49 seconds of active engagement across the final phase of both missiles' terminal approaches. The Al-Asad base alarm had activated at 3:17 a.m. and 28 seconds. 19 seconds after the first launch detection, 4 seconds after the preliminary trajectory solution established the base as a probable target. Personnel had been reaching hardened shelter positions for the 3 minutes and 30 seconds between the alarm activation and the second intercept's completion. The base's shelter occupancy rate at the time of the intercepts was assessed at approximately 78%. The remaining 22% were either in transit to shelter or in hardened work positions that provided fragment protection. No warhead reached the base. No fragment pattern from either intercept event extended to the base perimeter. The nearest intercept event, the second PAC-3 MSE engagement, had occurred 22 kilometers from the base at an altitude of 22 kilometers. The debris from both engagements was dispersed across the desert terrain southeast of the base, in the unpopulated zone between the installation and the Syrian border. The THAAD battery's post-engagement readiness report went to CENTCOM at 3:24 a.m. 1 kinetic intercept vehicle expended. Intercept confirmed. Battery assessment operational. Magazine status 1 round reduced from pre-engagement inventory. Estimated resupply timeline 41 hours. The Patriot battery at Al-Assad's post-engagement readiness report went to CENTCOM at 3:25 a.m. 2 PAC-3 MSE interceptors expended. 1 near-miss, 1 confirmed intercept. Battery assessment operational with reduced magazine. Magazine status 2 rounds reduced from pre-engagement inventory. Estimated resupply timeline 38 hours. 3 interceptors expended across 2 batteries in 49 seconds of active engagement. 3 interceptors against 2 maneuvering reentry vehicles, a salvo size that the pre-deployment training had modeled as the standard 2-shot protocol against maneuvering threats. The protocol had used 2 shots and achieved 2 intercepts. The first engagement had required 1 shot and achieved 1 intercept because the THAAD seeker's correction capability had been sufficient to close the 6-degree maneuver's displacement within the intercept vehicle's maneuvering budget. The second engagement had required 2 shots because the 11-degree maneuver had exceeded the first PAC-3 MSE's correction capability. The differential between 6 degrees and 11 degrees was the operational lesson that the intelligence and doctrine communities would spend the next 2 weeks extracting from the engagement data. A 6-degree maneuver was, at the engagement, geometries, and altitudes of the THAAD's operating band, within the kinetic intercept vehicle's single-shot correction capability. An 11-degree maneuver at the Patriot's operating altitude and the atmospheric density of the lower engagement band was not. It required the 2-shot protocol's second interceptor to achieve the result. The maneuver capability of the Iranian maneuvering reentry vehicle had been demonstrated at both ends of the range that the intelligence advisory had characterized. The advisory had said 6 to 15 degrees of lateral displacement was the assessed maneuver capability. The engagement had confirmed 6 degrees against THAAD and 11 degrees against Patriot, both within the advisory's range, both operational facts rather than analytical estimates. The Dezful launch site had been imaged by satellite within 40 minutes of the launch events. The imagery showed 2 empty transporter-erector launcher positions. The vehicles had displaced before the first intercept event, consistent with a launch-and-move doctrine that gave the launchers approximately 90 seconds between their final launch event and the time a potential retaliatory strike could arrive at the site based on any conceivable response timeline from the defended area. The vehicles were on the move in the imagery. Their route was tracked for 22 minutes before they entered a tunnel complex northeast of Dezful that the satellite's track could not follow. The tunnel complex had been in the intelligence file for 3 years. Its connection to the Dezful launch site had not been confirmed before this morning. It was confirmed at 3:58 a.m. when the satellite track placed the displacing launchers at its entrance with sufficient precision to support the analytical judgment that the tunnel system was the launcher's planned post-firing sanctuary. The operational recommendation in the intelligence assessment's final section was precisely worded. The confirmed use of a tunnel complex as a post-firing sanctuary at this site significantly extends the launcher survivability window beyond the retaliatory strike timeline achievable with assets currently positioned in theater. This survivability architecture is assessed as deliberate and rehearsed. Deliberate and rehearsed. The missile had maneuvered at precisely the altitude and with the lateral displacement that maximized the challenge to the defending system at each layer of the defense. The launchers had moved at precisely the timing that maximized their survival probability against a retaliatory response. The tunnel complex had been prepared before the attack to provide a sanctuary that the intelligence file had documented but had not connected to this specific launch site. None of it was improvised. All of it had been planned against the specific characteristics of the defense it was attacking. The intelligence officer who wrote the final assessment completed it at 6:30 a.m. He had been awake since the launch detection at 3:17 a.m. He reviewed the draft once, made 2 factual corrections to the timeline, and submitted it to the distribution queue. It would reach the operational planning community at every theater level before the morning briefings concluded. At Al-Assad, the base was operational in the morning light. Aircraft were on the ramp. The shelter network had been cleared and personnel had returned to their duties. The taxiways were clean. The fuel storage was intact. The flight operations area was exactly what it had been at 3 a.m. Before the launches, before the alarm, before 49 seconds of active engagement had placed 2 interceptors in the paths of 2 maneuvering warheads 22 kilometers above the desert. The Patriot crew was running their post-engagement systems check at first light, the battery's readiness cycle proceeding with the methodical attention to detail that missile defense operations required and that the engagement had just validated at the most demanding level available. The missile had maneuvered. The seeker had corrected. The intercept had held. That is what 14 months of briefings and 23 training rehearsals produce. Not certainty. Certainty is not available in this domain. What they produce is the margin by which uncertainty resolves correctly when the operational event arrives. The margin was 16 seconds on the first engagement and 10 seconds on the second. Both were enough. The base was open in the morning because they were enough. That will have to be enough until the next engagement. Because in this domain, enough is the only standard that exists, the only one that can be trained toward, and the only one that matters when the trajectory appears on the radar at 3:17 a.m.